As someone who has been a manager director of sterile processing, what I found is when I looked at the number of instruments I had and I divided it by the working days in a year, that math didn't add up. How do you help your customers develop a maintenance schedule?
Mhm. Well, look, this is not a unique problem. In fact, we see it across the entirety of hospitals and surgery centers in the country. Historically, preventative maintenance activity on surgical instrumentation has been a little bit of a guessing game. In theory, I shouldn't say in theory, in practice, what sterile processing managers do and OR managers do is they try to dial back the level of maintenance or dial up the level of maintenance until there's physician complaints. And when there's complaints, we know we have a problem, so we dial it back up again. And that roller coaster effect of dial it up, dial it back, dial it up, dial it back. It's not good for the instrumentation. It's confusing to the physicians because one day they have a sharp curette and the next 20 days later it's dull. It's a bad outcome for everybody. What we try to do is encourage our customers to build discipline into their preventative maintenance process. That doesn't mean there's one preventative maintenance process for all. What it means is you have to look carefully at your caseload. You have to look at the service lines that you're working in your operating room. Where is the bulk of your business? You have to look at your tray count, and you have to look at the composition of those trays. Taking all of those things into account, we work with our customers to build preventative maintenance programs that are not just specific to their trays or their instruments, but they're specific to their caseload and the way that their operating room runs. So that, in theory, helps make sure that every time a surgeon is using an instrument, it always has the same feel to him.
That's very cool. And I think what it is a little more complex than we kind of have had in the past. Like a lot of times the manager, director, or educator have not been involved in that process because it's been like, hey, whoever one person is or whatever was in place before I took over, we're just going to keep doing that. And so it sounds like that's not the right solution. That it's constantly evolving because your case mix doesn't is not the same as it was 3 years ago. And so I like that approach. So it's almost like you education needed so you can do some critical thinking around how you're doing the instrument maintenance.
That's true. I think the most common things that we see, I mean, look, sterile processing managers who ultimately have responsibility for setting maintenance cycles on surgical trays, they're busy people. They've got a million things going on, and somewhere on the lower portion of their priority list is setting the maintenance intervals for their trays. Hopefully, they get to it when the rest of their day clears. The simple reality is most of the tray tracking systems that are out there work best with time-based maintenance intervals, meaning I'm going to set a clock I'm going to look at these. I want to service my instruments 4 times a year. I put in the date of last service and I wait 3 months and then I service it again. Most of the modern systems today offer usage-based maintenance intervals so that you can trigger a maintenance event after a certain number of reprocessing cycles of a tray. Those are also useful. But I think in many cases, the pursuit of perfection in really perfectly building a maintenance schedule gets in the way of good enough maintenance activity, right? So, people will paint with a broad brush, say we're going to maintain our trays 3 times a year or 4 times a year, but not really realize that their neuro trays or that their total hip trays may need a higher level of maintenance than their L&D trays. So you've got to work with a partner in this industry, and there's plenty of good, reputable companies, mine included, that can help you build that schedule, help you document that schedule, and help you align it to the types of equipment that you have.
So this is really the service or your agility technician or lead working with the service line coordinator and really breaking down, because so many times the surgeon may ask for a certain tray or certain instrument and it's out for repair and nobody knew. And there's the communication between CS, agility rep, and the service line coordinator for that surgery service That's a team approach. I mean, is that how you guys really approach how to get that done?
Yeah, so we look at it we think there's really three key, if you will, resource or labor components to building a high compliance maintenance program. The first group of people are the sterile processing and OR managers and the service line leads, right? The clinical component of the work.
Mm-hmm.
That's where we understand the unique rhythm of their operating room, the nature of their caseload, the mix of the instrument trays that they have, the quantity of trays that they have, right? We use all that information and input from them. The collection point for that information is usually our on-site representatives. It could be the person in the truck. It could be a dedicated customer service representative that works with one of the hospitals on location. They're the intake point and the coordination point. They're the ones that use the tools that we've built to ask the right questions, collect the information so we can build a high compliance maintenance schedule. Then we have a team of dedicated analysts. Really, I like to refer to them as almost borderline data scientists, because their job is to look at this massive amount of information about trays and use rates and number of instruments per tray, and synthesize through that to align that with the case volumes and say, what is the right maintenance schedule based on what the instruments tell us about their usage patterns. So it's I call it data scientists because it's not like we can just plug it into a spreadsheet and build an algorithm that kicks out a number. If we could do that, we'd offer it to the whole of the industry overnight. The reality is there's a lot of work that goes into it. As
Mm-hmm.
everyone knows, we don't name trays consistently. We don't keep instrument counts up. We don't always cycle through our trays appropriately. I mean, just because we've got total hip trays 1 through 5 doesn't mean somebody always goes to the bottom of the pile to pull the tray out that's stacked below the others. So the usage counts really come into play in addition to the inventory parlance. That's what our data analysts and architects do. So taking all that together, we can come back and build a high compliant preventative maintenance program that really is specific to the facility.
I don't think I realized how much on year end went into creating that maintenance schedule. I knew the 3 components of communication and organizing it, but I didn't really know how much data went in on your end. So good job.
Yeah, and let's face it. If you go to any one of the leading tray tracking systems, they've come just in the past 5 years. Their ability to classify things and maintain data structures has come a long, long way, right? I mean, they've helped correct some of the bad behaviors over time that come from haste, right? We need to get a tray in. I'm going to name it a little bit differently. I'm going to put another instrument in, even though I've already got that pattern reflected in my system. The more consistency we have in the data, the easier the job gets, but it still doesn't eliminate the fact that, we've got 20 trays that are implant trays, right? It's just got implants in it. Well, we don't maintain implants. We've got to get those out of the mix and make sure that there isn't an interval, or it just creates static in the system.
Maybe our peer partners in the industry can be part of our advocates so that we have more evidence to take to the capital committee, to the service line, because when you have that, when you're running almost on E every day, that means, along with all the other troubles, turnover and all that stuff, that also means that stuff is not going to be maintained properly.
That's right. And what we find, I hate to say this because it sounds so trite and capitalist in today's world, but you just have to follow the money to understand that. If you follow the money, you get it. Hospitals have ample supply of general stainless instrumentation in general. We don't find that there's a big problem with that. We don't find that there's a way to maintain those instruments in a way that they will always be in good working condition if you elect to do that. As you move up the cost of instrumentation, you get into laparoscopic, you get into Kerrisons, you get into ebonized instruments. All of a sudden, when the price points get up into the thousands of dollars, they're scarce. Wow. And now all of a sudden, we can't get to them to maintain them as regularly, right? Then you move up the food chain even further to the devices, power equipment, rigid endoscopes, flexible endoscopes in particular. we find that is really where maintenance gets dropped, and people tend to move to a reactive maintenance model, which is wait for it to break, typically in the OR, in a surgeon's hand, in order to get things out for maintenance. And that particularly with regard to flexible endoscopes is a very dangerous proposition. Those devices, when not maintained properly, really can cause adverse outcomes to patients if they're not taken care of. Running them to failure is never a good idea. They need to be maintained regularly. But bringing it back down to instrumentation, we do find that justifying additional laparoscopic trays or justifying additional, higher end keratins and things like that, oftentimes we are brought into those discussions to make that happen. One final point I'll make before I leave this topic is that's why working with the right partner is so critical. If your instrument repair company is truly there to support your operating room and the rhythm of your business, they have to be available to work when those trays are available. We very often work odd hours. We'll work weekends. We'll work in the evenings in order to get to those really hard to access trays that are always in use. A big part of that as well is, particularly in the more advanced surgical specialties, take a cardiac tray. If you're in a large academic medical center where they have 4, 5, 6 of those trays, they don't want them maintained on a different schedule because they need those instruments to perform the exact same in the surgeon's hand, no matter what day of the week it is or how many times it's been used before. So often we'll service an entire service line and have 4 trucks on location in one day on a Saturday, so that we can set everything back to a baseline so the surgeons get used to what to expect. So it's really about understanding the hospital's rhythm and aligning the way we service equipment to that.
When your technicians get the instruments back, I've seen them take them to the truck and start to refurbish or repair them. They are identifying damage done in surgery or in the central sterile department. And so when your technicians identify damage from improper use, how do they handle that?
So the one thing we offer to all of our customers is a daily service summary report. And that report isn't just, hey, here's your bill for what we did today. It's an assessment of what we saw in those trays. So we'll include photographs of damage that could have been prevented. We'll provide photographs of life-worn instruments that are beyond the end of their useful life, and we tag those separately so that they can be flagged for replacement. So we try to provide some structure and some discipline to the way that communication happens. But if you really stop and think about it, if we do a great job documenting things, which what hospital doesn't love documentation these days, right? I mean, everyone wants paper, everyone wants proof. The problem is the proof never gets to the person who cares, right? Because we bring it back to the SPD with the trays. Maybe it makes it to the SPD manager's office. Maybe they take a look at it in between the 20,000 things they have on their to-do list. And maybe, just maybe, the sterile processing manager mentions it the next morning when they round to the service line coordinator that's actually affected by it. What we try to do is circumvent that process. We don't think that's efficient. We don't think that's good for the patient, and we don't think it's good for the clinicians to serve the patients. Instead, we encourage our technicians to go to the OR, to go to the direct service line coordinators, the people who are really the ones who care about the quality of the instrumentation and need that message. We encourage them to take that message back to them directly. Sometimes they'll do it via text message. Sometimes it'll be via an email. Sometimes it'll be via face-to-face conversation. But that's why, as much as supply chain, more than anyone, views surgical equipment repair as a commodity service, these are the things that differentiate the providers. These are the things that matter the most, is the data we capture in the process of doing our jobs is as important as the job that we do, because it's what informs continued improvement and excellence in the operating room. That's why we're really, really passionate about the importance of that communication. And we don't just train our guys on how to sharpen things. We don't train them on, proper technical techniques. Most of them have acquired those years ago. a lot of our training is focused on how we communicate with the customer. What are the different channels of communication? What are the appropriate channels of communication? What rises to the level of distracting an OR service line coordinator with a topic on surgical equipment repair? Using good judgment is really the critical component there, and we think that's something that really helps set us head and shoulders above as a service provider.
I agree. And Jameen and I are both from the OR originally, and being from the OR, what agility is doing to get the information directly to us in the OR, that's a huge game changer. I love that.
Well, we firmly believe it's about, we can observe tons of good, useful things, but if the message doesn't get to the right person,
That's right.
particularly in modern healthcare, it might as well have not been delivered at all.
What impact can the repair company delivering education to the client have on instrument repair rates and maintenance?
Huge topic for us, and we have a very extensive investment in education and educators in our company. We've got a full education team that builds a curriculum that we reassess on a rolling quarterly basis and say, okay, what's hot in sterile processing and in the OR now with respect to how equipment's handled? We think that education can make a huge difference. And let me preface that by saying, there's loads and loads of continuing education classes and general education classes on proper care and handling for various types of surgical equipment. There's loads of educational programs on how to improve communication and collaboration between the sterile processing department and the OR. Those are all useful courses and they're all appropriate. The key is teaching somebody about how to handle laparoscopic instruments who's already proficient in it is wasted energy. We're big believers in assessments and competencies as a way of gauging and directing educational focus. So we let the instruments inform us, the equipment inform us. If we see damage that's preventable, we work to prevent that. If we run into situations where we've assessed people's competencies and they're not as good at certain things as we think they should be, we address that. So we tailor the education based on competencies and based on the damage to the equipment so that it's all aligned, and we have a way of making sure that the education people get is actually education that's going to be valuable to them and worthwhile. We want to be a good partner to our customers. We want to be the kind of company that they rely on to say, hey, we want you to be the one responsible for making sure that we always have properly functioning equipment in our clinicians' hands at the time they need it. In order to do that, it truly has to be a partnership because we don't have custody of that equipment all the way through. There's dozens of people that touch it in the reprocessing cycle. We have to do a better job helping our customers be better themselves. And there's no better place for us to do that than to look at the instrumentation itself and say, wow, we consistently see the following damage to instruments or the following stain pattern, or we see the following points of corrosion on the instruments. Those are the things that tell us what do we need to teach people about. And that's why we've built our Agility University online portal that is available to sterile processing and OR professionals to get those general educational programs. But more importantly, we do field-based education that allows us to walk into an OR and an SPD and actually in-service people right there. They're going to get their continuing education credit, and the hospital is going to get the benefit of reduced damage based on the specific types of things we see in a hospital. You guys kind of, Angel, I really think you kind of got this whole thing started with online, e-learning based education for sterile processing people. The stuff that you guys had early on was phenomenal material and very, very valuable. What we found was as the overall market sort of tidal wave came across sterile processing education, we embraced it and said, hey, look, we've got to provide these programs, not just because every other competitor does, but because it's fundamental to our mission to help people be better with surgical equipment repair and maintenance.
Yeah, well, I can really hear your passion about the people. I know you're so in tune and knowledgeable about the process and the product, but the people, yeah, you really have a passion for the people, which is really what Advantage's premise was, to build and increase their skill and positions in
It's
departments. So
yeah,
that's good.
I mean, listen, healthcare is about people helping people. The equipment's just a tool to get there. The drugs, the pharmaceuticals, the resources, the therapeutics, those are all just tools we use to get there. But this is, that's what I think so often gets forgotten in this industry is, we can be the best technicians in the world, but unless we can relate to our customers on their level at the place that they're at, being a great technician doesn't get us anywhere. It's all about the people element to it. It's about overworked and underpaid sterile processing professionals in many cases, who haven't had the type of education they need to be excellent at their job, and who doesn't want to be good at what they do, whatever it is. If you're not good at it, go find something else to do. We have to. It's our job as leaders in healthcare to make sure that we've enabled people to reach that potential, whatever it may be. And that's a big part of Agility's philosophy about how we manage our teams and how we lead the people that we have that work inside hospitals all over the country every day, whether in surgical equipment repair, or our rental programs, or our on-site managed programs, where we actually are responsible for handling an inventory of infusion pumps or ventilators or other pieces of critical medical equipment for our customers. It's about it's a service business, and service is fundamentally about people. Big believer in it.
I agree. I agree. Definitely posting that one.
Oh,